Hello, I'm Brett Douglas, author of the books American Drug Addict, Staring at Nothing, and An Overpriced Puppy Trainer. Now, after my last video, I actually got a request. Someone asked if I would review the opening chapter of Morning Glory Milking Farm by C.M. Nascosta. Now, judging by the cover, this is not a book I would typically read, but I am ready to broaden my horizons. Now, why review opening chapters? Because the opening chapter is the most important chapter of the book. This is where the reader will be introduced to the characters and the world that those characters live in. It will set the tone of the book, and it's an indication as to the writing prowess of the author. The opening chapter will determine if the reader wants to continue reading or if they put the book down. Before we get started, I would like to say that this chapter is publicly available on Amazon. I will be critiquing this chapter. The author has not asked me to do this. I'm not impugning the author or the author's work in any way. I'm simply providing my opinion. So with all of that said, let's get started. Morning Glory Milking Farm, Chapter 1. The goal for every client is a plentiful, speedy collection. That is the expectation with which you will approach every shift, getting our clients in and out and on with their day, all while maintaining our quality protocols. A plentiful, speedy collection makes for happy clients and a productive farm. The opening paragraph to the opening chapter should seize the reader's attention immediately. It should present an interesting question or a situation that doesn't make sense. Something to pique the reader's interest. The opening paragraph here sounds like it's a line from an ad or a commercial. After reading it and looking at the cover, I have to ask myself, is this going where I think it's going? One point before we go on, the last line ends with an exclamation point. I don't believe this last line was yelled or screamed or said in some forceful way. When I first started writing, I was told that there should be only one exclamation point per novel. I don't know if I agree with that, but exclamation points are certainly overused. They should be reserved for those moments where extreme emotion is being expressed. They should not be used just for emphasis. Anyway. The fox-like woman's beaming, sharp-edged smile froze. Her glinting canines transformed into something sinister and vaguely threatening as Violet tapped the laptop, pausing the video for the third time that morning. She'd not yet made it past the introduction today, needing to repeatedly remind herself to breathe and stay upright. She was home, so bolting out into the hallway and making a break for the elevator would make little sense, particularly if she wanted to avoid the uncomfortable scenario of her elderly neighbors hearing the sound of the video coming from her apartment and discovering what she was watching. She thought of little old Mrs. Mulstein from down the hall, a withered, hunched crone with the beginnings of dementia, accidentally wandering into the wrong apartment, catching sight of the instructional video, and having a stroke right there in the middle of the living room. Is that what you want? For the last thing that sweet old woman sees is some minotaur getting a job? Get a fucking grip and make up your mind. So here we're introduced to the main character, Violet. She's watching a video, and there's a fox-like woman with shining canines. Right now, I'm unclear, is the woman in the room with Violet, or is she the subject of the video that she's watching? Now, right here, we see a minotaur is going to get a job. This is going exactly where I thought it was going. I would not divulge this fact right now. The question of what Violet is watching is a great hook. We know the video is so shocking, it could literally kill the next door neighbor. So leaving it open as to what it is on the video, I think would entice the reader more than just spilling it right here on the second page. I would leave that off and let it hang for a little while. In fact, let the reader discover what's going on here at the same time that Violet does. Here's another explanation point. It's not needed. We've on the second page and we've already got two of them. So if you notice here, we have she wanted to avoid the uncomfortable scenario of her elderly neighbors hearing the sound of the video. And then in this paragraph, she thought of little Mrs. Mulstein down the hall. Why not mention Mrs. Mulstein here? You could combine these two and say, particularly if she wanted to avoid the uncomfortable scenario of her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Mulstein, a withered, hunched crone with the beginnings of dementia. So you could cut almost two entire sentences and say the exact same thing. So mentioning the neighbor here, and then again mentioning the neighbor here, is redundant.
Anyway.
Her portal access was only good for another 8 hours. 8 hours in which to decide whether or not she'd be a good fit for the team at Morning Glory Farm. If her jangling nerves and ever-present anxiety would allow her to take the plunge, and clicked accept. The implication of the fox woman's words and what exactly she'd be gripping if she took the job occurred to Violet then, and she moaned in mortification. It wasn't the first preposterous mental image she'd concocted since leaving Cambric Creek the previous afternoon. And Violet was certain, as she clicked play once more, that it wouldn't be the last. So in this section right here, we establish that she's in front of her computer at the employment portal for Morning Glory Farm. She has 8 hours in which to decide if she wants the job. Okay, just starting off right away, we've got a typo. Now, typically, when you see one sentence ending with a phrase, like 8 hours, and the very next sentence begins with the very same phrase, you can combine both of those sentences. If you wanted to keep the repeat 8 hours for dramatic effect, maybe use a comma or a em dash instead of a period. Here, we have an em dash. I think the em dash here isn't needed. A good fit for the team at Morning Glory Farm, comma, that is, if her jangling nerves and ever-present anxiety, etc. So I would probably move the em dash from here and move it up here where the typo is. I do like the play on words. She moaned in mortification. So she's thinking about what the fox woman said, which was the opening paragraph, and exactly what she would be gripping. And she moaned in mortification. That's a nice play on words. Now here we have she'd. It's a contraction for she had. But it also, if you look up here, this is she would. She would be a good fit. But down here, it's she had. Now, I personally do not like contractions in narrative. Dialogue, no problem. We need that to make dialogue sound natural. But in narrative, we want the narrative to be as clear as possible. One last thing, I think that this final sentence, Violet was certain as she clicked play once more that it wouldn't be the last. That sentence should stand on its own. So I would delete this and right here that I've highlighted and put a period there.
Anyway.
The job listing had seemed too good to be true. Now hiring technicians and assistants. No prior experience required. On-the-job training. Full benefits. Flexible scheduling. Visit our webpage for more information and apply today. Morning Glory Farm is a subsidiary of Fizzle Pharmaceuticals. Violet had known it the moment it pinged the hiring app on her phone nearly a week ago. She'd squinted at her phone screen in disbelief as she scrolled. No experience necessary. On-the-job training provided. 2 weeks vacation and full benefits, including dental. Dental. She had no idea what a milking technician was, nor what it entailed, but the advertised starting salary was higher than any belonging to the handful of jobs open to her degree field, none of which paid enough to comfortably keep a roof over her head. Okay, very first sentence, there's two it's. There's one here. They're like within 4 words of each other. So Violet had known it the moment it pinged the hiring app. The two it's in this sentence do not refer to the same thing. This second it refers to the job listing. But what this first it refers to is unclear. I don't know what it is that Violet knew when the phone pinged. Did she know it was a job? Did she know that she would be qualified for it? Did she know a minotaur would be involved? We don't know. The other thing I noticed is the hiring app is what pings. So something pinged her hiring app. Maybe it was the job opening, but it was the hiring app itself that pinged her phone. I know it seems like I'm nitpicking, but each sentence needs to be clear, and each idea expressed needs to logically flow into the next one. The reason for this is because the reader can only focus on one thing at a time. They're either focusing on the story, or they're focusing on the logistics of the story. They're either immersed in the meaning of the words, or they're struggling to understand them. When the sentences are unclear, or they have to be reread to understand the meaning, then it takes the reader out of the story, and now they're studying the structure of the story. The structure of the story should be invisible to the reader. It should be an effortless endeavor. Now, right here it says, on her phone nearly a week ago. And then right after that, it says she had squinted at her phone. Now, we've established that it pinged over a week ago. There's no need to put she had. She can just put she squinted at her phone. By the time we get to the second sentence, we already know that we're in the past because it's been established that it was nearly a week ago. Now, right here, we have a list. No experience necessary, on-the-job training provided, 2 weeks vacation, and full benefits. Whenever there's a list of things, we want each item in the list to be structurally identical to the other items in the list. It makes the list read smoothly. The word provided here breaks that structure. So if you delete that, it reads, no experience necessary, on-the-job training, 2 weeks vacation, and full benefits. Right here we have comfortably, which is an adverb. Not all adverbs are bad, but most of them are. The question that should be asked by the author is, does the meaning of the sentence change if I remove it? So what's the difference between keeping a roof over your head and comfortably keeping a roof over your head? I would say that there's no difference. So I would cut comfortably. No need for it.
Anyway.
The family upstairs had chosen that moment to begin what sounded like a good old-fashioned barn-stomping square dance, reminding her that the roof over her head wasn't exactly anything to brag about, which made the fact that she struggled to pay her rent even more galling. Pumpkin, Daddy and I have been I misread that. Pumpkin, Daddy and I have been talking. Now I know you're going to say no, but please just think about it, okay? We think you ought to consider coming home while you're looking for work. She'd practically been able to hear her mother raising a hand to hold off any protestations. Could imagine it easily. This paragraph here was still in the flashback when she's looking at the job ad, and at that moment, the neighbors upstairs are making a lot of noise. She thinks she's paying way too much for rent, considering the type of place that she's living in. The next paragraph is a conversation. It's obviously from Mom because it says Daddy and I, but there's no transition into this conversation. Adding a few words at the beginning of this paragraph, like she could hear her mom now, and then go into this conversation would make it clearer. It would be a nice little transition knowing that, okay, we're leaving the neighbors upstairs and now we're moving into the conversation that she had with Mom. I would get rid of the M dashes, and what I would do is take this middle part and put it at the end. So it would read, Pumpkin, Daddy and I have been talking. We think you ought to consider coming home while you're looking for work. Now I know you're going to say no, but please just think about it, okay? And the last sentence here, practically, is an adverb, and removing it does not change the meaning of the sentence one bit. So cut that word. Also, she had been able, but we already know we're in the past, so get rid of the had, because you can't hear someone raising their hand in a literal sense. You need to indicate that this is meant to be taken figuratively. So I would mention that they're on the phone. She could hear her mother raising her hand over the phone. This last part right here, I think, just repeats what's been previously said, and it also could be cut.
Anyway,
if you think you'd feel too crowded in the house now that Aunt Gracie is with us, we can clean out the loft over the garage. It would be like having your own little apartment. You wouldn't need to worry about rent, and you'd be out of that awful city. Just promise me you'll think about it, all right? It doesn't make any sense to be wasting so much money before you found something stable, and it would be so nice having you home. She'd gripped the phone with whitened knuckles, trying to hold back her tears until disconnecting. Her mother always seemed to know when to call, always knew when she was at her lowest and most vulnerable, always with an abundance of love, overflowing with compassion and eager to help, but always at the worst times. Moving to Bridgeton for grad school had always been a point of contention with her mother. Too dangerous, too expensive, too dirty, too far away. She hadn't wanted her only child moving to the big city, several hours away from her hugs and home-cooked meals and her own untreated anxiety disorder. But Violet had been adamant. Okay, first thing, another M dash, get rid of that. The question, just promise me you'll think about it, all right, needs to be at the end of this entire monologue. Aunt Gracie's there. We can clean out the loft. It's your own little apartment. No need to worry about rent. No need to spend so much money. And then end it with, just promise me you'll think about it, okay? Okay, so look at the second sentence in the first paragraph. We have two M dashes. When the M dash is used in this manner, it means to cordon off a piece of information that is relevant, but not absolutely necessary to the story. It's like an add-on piece of information. You should be able to remove that, and then the sentence basically says the same thing. So let's do that. Let's cut this section out and read the sentence. Her mother always seemed to know when to call, always knew when she was at her lowest and most vulnerable, but always at the worst times. That sentence doesn't make sense. So what I would do is cut the M dashes here, here. I would replace them with commas, and then I would change this to and. Lowest and most vulnerable, always with an abundance of love, overflowing with compassion and eager to help, and always at the worst times. Now notice we have a list here, too dangerous, too expensive, too dirty, too far away. Each element in this list shares the exact same structure. That's exactly how that's supposed to be done. We know we're in the past, so we don't need hadn't. Just say she didn't. She didn't want her only child moving to the big city. And this last sentence, but Violet had been adamant. One, again, we know we're in the past, so change this to was. But Violet was adamant. It also needs to be its own sentence. I mean, that's like a very clean and effective way to close out the paragraph. So let this sentence stand on its own. Change this comma to a period. But Violet was adamant.
Anyway,
it was a bitter pill to swallow now, being forced to admit her mother was not wrong in her assessment. There was a particular sort of indignity that came along with being simultaneously well-educated and in dire straits financially. She had done everything right, had studied hard, made the dean's list, participated in campus events, graduated with honors. But then, by the time she'd earned her bachelor's degree, her chosen job field required a master's, sending her back to the classroom, taking out several loans to do so, confident that she'd begin her career immediately after graduation. Her part-time job in the urban development office actually put her degree to use, but they'd been upfront that it was unlikely to turn into a permanent position, not with the scads of people who had priority ahead of her. Bridgeton was too expensive, and Violet had come to admit that she didn't actually love living in the middle of the big urban city the way she thought she would. Admitted it to herself, at least. In the next paragraph, we have another list. Had studied hard, made the dean's list, participated in campus events, graduated with honors. Most of these start with a past tense verb, but on the very first one, there's the word had. Cut that. So in this next section here, her chosen job field required a master's, sending her back to the classroom. There's no problem there, but the next line is taking out several loans to do so. So the job requirement is sending her back to the classroom, but the job requirement isn't taking out several loans to do so. What I would do is put a period here, so that sentence is a sentence by itself, and then start a new sentence here. She took out several loans to do so, confident that she'd begin her career immediately after graduation. There's the word that. The word that is the cockroach of the literary world. It just spreads through your writing, and most of the time it's not needed. You could delete this and the sentence would read just the same. She took out several loans to do so, confident she'd begin her career immediately after graduation. So in this next sentence, there's a lot of unnecessary words. This section right here, but they'd been upfront that it was unlikely to turn into a permanent position. You can simply say it wasn't a permanent position. Because look at this. They'd been upfront that it was unlikely to turn into a. All of those words could be replaced with wasn't. It wasn't a permanent position. I don't think that this line at the end of the paragraph is needed. I think ending the paragraph with the idea that her current job is not a permanent position drives home the fact that she's in financial straits. It's been stated several times. Now, this last line here, not with scads of people that had priority ahead of her, if you cut this from the paragraph, it doesn't change the meaning of the paragraph at all. So I think you could cut that. Also, if you did cut that, the paragraph would end with the idea that her current position is not permanent. Okay, this next paragraph, we have the big urban city. That's redundant. It's implied when you say city that it's big and that it's urban. So you could just say city. If you're going to put quantifiers here, it needs to tell us something about the city that we don't already know from the word city. So big and urban can be cut. Anyway, if I don't find something soon, I'm not going to have much of a choice, she'd agreed bitterly, pressing her tongue into the roof of her mouth as her mother cooed sympathetically. Don't cry. If you start crying, she'll drive here tonight. In hindsight, putting herself into debt to work in the nonprofit sector seemed almost comical. Would have been a f***ing riot were it anyone else. Unfortunately, it was hard to appreciate the humor of the situation when she was the butt of the joke. There had been no crystal ball to show her that the job market would bottom out, no sidewalk soothsayer to warn her away from the debt she was taking on. The near future had no clarion call, and so she'd never suspected she'd find herself overqualified for 75% of the jobs with openings, and unable to pay back her student loans with the entry-level salaries they offered. She was tired of struggling to pay her rent, was certain she was giving herself an ulcer, stressing over her inability to repay her loans, and remitting the bare minimum on her nearly maxed-out credit cards. But the thought of moving home, back to the boring little town she'd lived in her entire life, where no one ever left, and no one ever did anything but have more kids to ensure future generations of drudgery, to the loft above her parents' garage, currently filled with boxes from Aunt Gracie's house, and evidence of her mother's hobbies pursued and long since abandoned, was not one she could abide. Now, here was this job, a potential lifeline if she got it. She clicked the Apply Now button without another moment of hesitation. Anything would be better than moving home. Who cares what it's for? Okay, first sentence here, we have a semicolon. If you use a semicolon in this manner, there should be two independent clauses on each side of it. So there should be one complete sentence, semicolon, and then another complete sentence. But that's not what we have here. The next sentence is, would have been a f***ing riot were it anyone else. Now look at this sentence, would have been a riot if it were anyone else. Unfortunately, it was hard to appreciate the humor of the situation when she was the butt of the joke. This makes the main character difficult to like. What she's saying is that it's funny when it happens to other people, but when it happens to me, it's not funny. So if the reader doesn't like the character, then the reader is not going to care what happens to the character. So we have another contraction here and here. Generally, when you have the same pronoun this close to one another, you can shorten this sentence and get rid of one of them. She never expected to find herself overqualified. Says the same thing, and you don't have the repeated word. All right, in the next paragraph, we have another semicolon that's used improperly. You could simply put comma and. She was tired of struggling to pay her rent and was certain she was giving herself her ulcer. And if you wrote it that way, you could cut all of this out. Now, this next sentence is really long. Basically, the sentence is, but the thought of moving back home was one she could not abide. That's the sentence. Look at all of this that's in between. By the time I read all of this and I read was not one she could abide, I had forgotten what the first part of the sentence was. You could simply write, but the thought of moving home back to the boring little town she had lived in her entire life was one she could not abide. That would say the same thing, because no one ever did anything to have more kids of future generations of drudgery. Well, that's kind of implied when you say boring little town. Now, this sentence mentions the loft and the boxes of Gracie's belongings. That's already been mentioned. There's no need to mention it again. Here's another contraction. Understand that she had clicked. We know we're in the past. We're jumping forward in the flashback. We went to a flashback and then we went back to mom's conversation, and now we're jumping forward, but not to present. All of that's confusing. So when you're reading the story, it's also confusing.
Anyway.
Famous last words. She'd been forced to admit the previous day, squirming in her seat as the training video had been queued up, glancing surreptitiously at the other prospective new hires in attendance. A green-skinned woman with broad shoulders and curving tusks, whose long black braid sat heavily on her shoulder. A slender troll who'd scarcely looked up from her phone since they'd entered the video room. An anxious-seeming young man with long rabbit-like ears who carried a water bottle emblazoned with the local university's logo. And a pair of goblins who seemed to know each other if their non-stop chatter was an indication. There was not another human in sight, but Violet had been half expecting that. So now she's in the interview, and she's the only human in the interview room. But notice in this very first sentence, she had. So we're still in the past. So now we've got another flashback, but it is closer to the present moment than the previous two flashbacks. This is turning into homework. Also notice it says the previous day. So we don't need had here because we've just stated that the previous day was when the interview took place. There's another had. Now, glancing surreptitiously, this is an adverb that's not needed. It's kind of cumbersome the way it reads, so I would cut that. Here we have a list of the people that are in the room. Previously, the author has used a colon, but for some reason she put a period here. Maybe a colon or an M dash, because we're about to list off everybody that was in the room.
Anyway.
The interview process had been simple and straightforward. An online portal to apply, followed by a video call, during which she'd been asked about her work history and organizational skills. She'd been invited to visit the facility for the final step in the process, traveling to Cambric Creek, a neighboring suburb that boosted a multi-species population. a longer commute than she'd been hoping for. But as the GPS led her through the suburb's quaint downtown, past shops and restaurants until housing developments gave way to agriculture and industrial parkways, she reminded herself of the full benefits offered. Before she knew it, she was turning onto a long circular driveway, parking in front of a building with the outer facade of a great red barn, praying this might be the break she needed. It's going to be fine. You can do this. Who cares if you're the only human? You really need this job. Now notice this paragraph here. We're in the past, but we're at the interview. And this paragraph is describing what she had to do before she got to the interview. So now we're going further back in the flashback. We have a colon here, which means a list is coming. But the list only mentions an online portal. Then it's followed by a video call. This part right here, during which she was asked about her work history and organizational skills, you can cut that. How I would write this is after the colon, an online portal, a job application, a video call. That's all you have to say. Here's she'd. We don't need that. We know we're in the past. In fact, in this paragraph, we're going further back in the past to where the flashback initially started. The rest of this paragraph is talking about her driving to the interview, but it's before the flashback of her sitting in the interview room. I would cut the M dash here and start a new sentence. It was a longer commute than she'd been hoping for. Again, change this. It was a longer commute than she was hoping for. This is an odd phrase. The suburbs quaint downtown. Generally, you either live in the suburbs or you live downtown. I would reword this because it's not very clear. And this is interesting. She reminded herself of the full benefits offered. I don't think she was thinking about her 401k. All right, right here, she was turning onto a long circular driveway. I don't like the way that's described. Generally, when I think of a long road, that means the longer you drive, the further you're away from your destination. Circular means the longer I drive, the closer I get back to the point where I started. So I would cut the word long. Now look at this. The last line here. Who cares if you're the only human? She hasn't gone into the interview room yet. So she doesn't know at this point, when she's pulling up to this building that looks like a barn, that she'll be the only human applicant. And yet she's mentioning it here. The flashbacks are so confusing that even the author has lost track of where she is.
Anyway.
The aesthetic design of the building went out of its way to invoke the friendly feeling of a neighborhood farmstead, both inside and out. Artificial turf in the lobby with the ceiling painted to look like a summer sky, bright punchy colors that invoked gleaming tractors and richly painted barns, with milk glass vases of daisies on every surface. They had spared no expense creating the visuals, Violet thought as she filled out tax forms and onboarding paperwork before joining the small cluster of other prospective hires. The farmhouse aesthetic ended within the sterile white hallways of the employee corridors, the synthetic turf flooring of the lobby giving way to linoleum and the bright colors smoothing out to cool eggshell and ice blue. A strange prickle of apprehension had crept up her neck. A shiver she attributed to jitters and the strangeness of being the only human in the group. Okay, here she's describing the interior of the building, which is made to look like a barn, just like the exterior. And then as they're led into the employee area, that the design goes away, and now it's a sterile office building. This is a fragment right here. So is this. So they're separated by a semicolon, which is incorrect. This could simply be attached to the previous sentence with an M dash right here. And then put a comma here instead of the semicolon. And then here we're mentioning again that she's the only human in the group. I think this is the third time it's been mentioned. I don't think it needs to be. Allow the reader to determine on their own where the jitters are coming from. So the prickle of apprehension that crept up her neck, a shiver she attributed to jitters. There's no need to spell out why that is. If the situation has been described adequately, which in this case I think it has, there's no need to spoon feed the reader on where the jitters are coming from.
Anyway.
Welcome to Morning Glory. We appreciate you all taking time out of your days to visit the farm. The tiefling standing before them had a cool blue skin and the curling horns of a ram, and her smile was overly wide. Today we'll be giving you a tour of the facility, as well as the opportunity to register on our online portal, and watch some process videos. Your portal access is good for 24 hours, in which time you'll need to decide whether you'll be a good fit for our team. If the answer is yes, you can input your schedule availability, and you'll be put into the rotation for the following week. The girl had paused to smile brightly once more, a spade-tipped tail swishing behind her. Your first 2 weeks on the job will be shadowing technicians who have been with us from the beginning. So rest assured, you'll be shown everything you need to learn before you'll be on your own. So a blue Typhlin is the manager here, and she's introducing the applicants to the process going forward. Now, notice we have an explanation point here. Welcome to Morning Glory. I doubt the manager screamed this at them. Also, we have another one here. Overusing explanation points just makes them lose their potency. Now, we have 3 items here. The Typhlin had cool blue skin, the curling horns of a ram, and an overly wide smile. But notice the last thing in this list is not structured the way these first 2 are. What it should say is the Typhlin standing before them had cool blue skin, comma, cut this, the curling horns of a ram, and an overly wide smile. Okay, so this line right here tells me that I was wrong about the order in which these events are occurring. I assume she applied online, then went to the interview. What this line is telling me here is that she went to the interview and then got access to the portal and watched the video. See, when you have the flashback jumping back and forth constantly, it's difficult to determine where these events are occurring in relation to one another. There's no need for an M dash here. You can cut the comma here. Have been with us from the beginning, so rest assured, comma, you'll be shown everything you need to learn.
Anyway.
Violet had trailed on the edge of the group for the next hour, feeling awkward and out of place as they followed the Typhlin in and out of various rooms. And she hadn't been any closer to understanding what exactly the job she'd applied for entailed by the time they were led to a large classroom-like space, taking seats at the tables as the first training video was queued up. The overhead lights had dimmed, and instantly the chatter in the room had ceased, everyone straightening to attention as the video began. A bright-eyed woman with the features of a fox had filled the screen, beaming from the center of the same lobby the prospective employees had gathered in that morning, wearing a black and white Holston-printed apron over a white cap-sleeve top. Behind her, filling the upholstered lobby chairs, were a cluster of minotaurs. Welcome to Morning Glory Farm. Incorporated nearly a decade ago, our mission has remained the same since the day our lab processed its first specimen: to uphold the integrity of the genetic material in our care, to set a new standard in pharmaceutical processing that the entire industry would model, and to provide a client-first attitude in all we do. Our brand new state-of-the-art facility in Cambric Creek marries all 3 tenets, putting the client experience at the center of our collection process. As a milking technician on our collection floor, you will be tasked with ensuring a plentiful, speedy collection, processed in accordance with our standards in safety and sterility. You've already taken a tour of the facility. Now you'll get to see our process in action. Follow me. Now the prospective employees are watching a video. In the video is a woman with fox-like features. She welcomes them to Morning Glory Farms, then informs the group that she'll demonstrate what they will be doing in this job. In this first sentence, we have the woman with the features of a fox. She's in the lobby with prospective employees that had gathered that morning. And then it says, wearing a black and white Holston printed apron over a white cap sleeve top. This could be referring to the Fox lady, which I believe it is, or if you read further in the sentence, it could be referring to the prospective employees. This is called a dangling modifier. Whoever's wearing a black and white Holston printed blah, blah, blah needs to be mentioned very last in this sentence. A bright-eyed woman with the features of a fox wearing a black and white Holston printed apron over a white keepslap top had filled the screen. That way there's no ambiguity. We know exactly who's wearing this outfit. It's the Fox lady. Now we got another had. You can cut that. We know it's a flashback, okay? Here's another explanation point. Now notice this is the second time we've been welcomed to Morning Glory Farm. I would cut one of those. I would probably leave the first mention of it and then cut this entire sentence here and have the Fox lady in the video start with, incorporated nearly a decade ago, Morning Glory Farm's mission has remained the same. We have another list here of the 3 tenets of this business. Sometimes the author uses an M dash and sometimes she uses a colon. I would use the colon. But whichever way you decide to do it the same way every time. Now, the 3 items in this list: to uphold the integrity of the genetic material in our care, to set a new standard in pharmaceutical processing, which kind of fits the structure of the first item in the list, so that the entire industry would model, can be cut, and to provide a client-first attitude in all we do. So if you cut this part right here, the whole list flows structural-wise. Now, here is another explanation point. But this Fox lady is in a video and she tells the clients, follow me, but they can't follow her because she's in a video.
Anyway.
On the screen, the Fox woman had twinkled as one of the minotaurs behind her rose, following her through a set of double doors. Violet had felt a sudden wave of nerves grip her, an inexplicable panic that had tightened her throat and made her grip the sides of her chair as if she needed to hold on for dear life. A plentiful, speedy collection? What does that mean? What do the Minotaurs have to do with anything? She had had no idea why, no clue what caused the sudden premonition to squeeze her heart, but a tiny, panicked voice in her head had begun to whisper, "Run." So here, Violet, the main character, is becoming aware of what exactly the job entails. She's getting a clue. Now, if you remember earlier in the book, there was a comment about jobs. I would cut that. This is the moment where Violet discovers what the job is. And it also should be the moment that the reader discovers what the job is. And I would also make this moment present day, not a flashback. Now, in the first sentence here, the Fox woman had twinkled. One, we get it. We're in the past. The Fox woman twinkled. How does someone twinkle? Her eyes can twinkle. A star can twinkle. When I first read this, I said tinkled. And, it wasn't that. Okay, so here, her throat is tightening and she gripped the sides of her chair as if she needed to hold on for dear life. This is redundant. She's gripping the side of her chair. Her throat is tightening. There's no need to explain why or to what degree she's gripping the side of the chair. Okay, in this last section here, she had no idea why, no clue what caused the sudden premonition. Well, that basically is a restatement of the thoughts. She's thinking, what does all of this mean? What am I going to be doing? So this entire part right here can be cut and start the next sentence here. A tiny panicked voice in her head. Now look, had begun to. One, had, we know we're in the past. We get it. Begun to. Did the voice just start to whisper or did it whisper? Sometimes that's an important distinction, but the vast majority of the times it isn't. So instead of she began to run, or she began to talk, or she began to whisper, you can just say talked or ran or whispered. So that could be cut too. The sentence would be, a tiny panicked voice in her head whispered, run. Less words, much more effective.
Anyway.
As you've already seen, our state-of-the-art collection rooms have been designed for both client comfort and ease of execution by our milking technicians. The bi-level design puts the tools you need right at your fingertips, keeping the process seamless and efficient. A dedicated team ensures each collection room is fully stocked and set up for every client, so there's no lag time, setting you up for success. On the screen, several feet above the cheerful woman on the upper portion of the curiously designed room, the Minotaur had lowered his pants. Violet wasn't sure if her strangled gasp had been swallowed up by the room, for no one had turned or shushed her. And she'd been very nearly able to convince herself she'd imagined seeing the quick glance of a rounded backside and a swishing tail as the camera panned over a chrome appliance in the center of the room where the smiling woman stood. But there could be no question a moment later when a semi-erect Minotaur appeared through an opening beside the woman's head. Heavy-looking hung behind the jutting appendage, and the fox woman had beamed, depressing the pump of a large bottle on the table beside her, coating her gloved hands in oil. Once your room is set up and your client arrives, you'll need to ensure the collection unit is loaded and your client clipboard is in order. Then there's only one thing left to do. Her smile had widened, showing a row of blinding white teeth, offset with long, sharp, completely inhuman canines, and her hands had raised, gripping the without a moment of hesitation. Start milking. So in this section right here, it becomes very obvious what the job entails. On the second paragraph here, we have the cheerful woman, which I assume is the fox woman. I would not make her cheerful. And the reason is because I think it's much more effective if everyone involved, the people that work there and the other potential employees, all look at this as just a job. There's nothing to be enjoyed by it. There's nothing to be disgusted by it. It's just a job that needs to be done. And our main character, Violet, she's the one that needs to get emotionally involved in this, which I highly suspect that's what's going to happen. So I would cut cheerful. Now, since it's a fox-like woman, I may mention that we're still in the video. The reason I would mention that it was the fox-looking woman is because there's also a female employee, the one with a long pointy tail, that's also with them in the group while they're watching this video. So it can be unclear exactly who we're talking about. So this is discussing her strangled gasp. So we're discussing a gasp that appears that it hasn't happened yet. I would write Violet gasp, unsure if it had been swallowed up by the room. I would cut this and start a new sentence here, period. No one had turned and shushed her. Now, this next part, she'd been very nearly able to convince herself she imagined seeing the quick glance of. Now, she's going to see a rounded backside and a swishing tail, but look at all of these words. We have to read all of these words before we get to what it is she's looking at. How is someone very nearly able? That's a contradiction. She didn't imagine seeing the rounded backside and swishy tail. She saw it. As the camera panned over a chrome appliance in the center of the room where the smiling woman stood, like I said before, I would not have the woman enjoying this job because it's just a job to her. This entire sentence could be cut. It doesn't add anything to the meaning of the paragraph. But there could be no question. What is in question? Like, what is she doubting? Is she doubting that she's seeing this? Does she not believe her eyes? I would cut that also. You could start the sentence here. A moment later, comma, a semi-erect Minotaur appeared through an opening beside the woman's head. We have the fox woman beaming. Like I said before, she's enjoying this too much.
Anyway.
That human men placed an enormous importance on their was no surprise to her. The whole world seemed to be designed for after all. Offices that were too cold, seat belts that cut across the neck instead of sitting comfortably across the chest, medicines that had only ever been tested on one segment of the population. Modern conveniences had been designed with only one half of the population in mind, at least in the human world. So the discovery that there was an entire underground industry devoted to humans' men's was not at all surprising. Learning the lengths to which pharmaceutical companies were willing to go to ensure the production of those enhancing little blue pills didn't slow, however, was eye-opening. Bull's, specifically Minotaur's, was a major component in giving the pills the oomph their devotees needed. And she, in her new role, if she decided to take the job, would be responsible for collecting it. She needed to decide by that evening, a decision that seemed as daunting as it had in the hours after she had left the farm in a daze as it did now. So in this section, the author is griping about the fact that it's a man's world. And we learn why they need the genetic material from the Minotaurs. This section starts with a scene break. Now, a scene break is needed when there is a lapse in time, or there's a setting change, or there's a point of view change. But we don't have any of those here, so I would say cut the scene break. I also don't like starting the opening sentence of this paragraph with that. You could easily just switch it up. She was not surprised that human men place an enormous importance on their Of course, I would say women place some sort of importance on their. The next part, the whole world seemed to be designed for after all. I think by she means men. I think the sentence would read better if you put men. The whole world seemed to be designed for men after all. Now, looking at this paragraph, this first sentence about what human men place their importance on, this next sentence, which is some examples of how it's a male-centered world, and then the third sentence, which talks about modern conveniences had only been designed with men in mind, are all basically expressing the same idea. What if you got rid of this sentence and this one? Just cut them completely. Now, how would it read? She was not surprised that human men placed an enormous importance on their. So the discovery that there was an entire underground industry devoted to human men's was not surprising at all. I think it reads better without those sentences there. Now, these next two sentences, which is important because it tells us why this company is doing these things to the Minotaurs. Basically, you could rewrite it and say pharmaceutical companies needed Minotaur genetic material to enhance the little blue pills, or something to that effect. I think both of these could be combined into one sentence and could be written with half as many words. I would cut the "and" and the "m" dash and start a new sentence here. She would be responsible for collecting it if she decided to take the job. The second paragraph, this sentence is very convoluted. A decision that seemed as daunting as it had in the hours after she had left the farm in a daze as it did now. The reason this is such a tortured sentence is because we are still in a flashback. So far, the most remarkable thing that has happened in this chapter, 1, happened on video, and 2, happened in a flashback. I would have the Fox lady demonstrate it in person rather than have it in video. And like I've said before, I would have it all happening at the present moment and not in a flashback. Then you could rewrite this, a decision that seemed as daunting now as it had back at the interview. Again, half as many words, says the exact same thing.
Anyway.
She had spent the rest of the previous evening slumped over her laptop, watching slack-jawed as the beaming fox woman in the video worked off Minotaur after Minotaur, Huge, hulking bullmen resting comfortably against the padded breeding stocks, their thick members prominently displayed for the technician who stood a level below them. Her dreams that night had been a twisted tangle of sharp, smiling teeth and the silhouettes of huge men, the shadows of their horns completely engulfing her as she was pushed to stand beneath them until she'd woken, gasping, in a sweaty tangle, unsure of where she was or what she was contemplating. Now that she'd watched the video repeatedly, small details she might have overlooked otherwise jumped out at her. The Minotaur's girthy members vaguely resembling their human counterparts, but there was no comparing the size. Commiserate with the heft of the hulking bullmen, their were long and impossibly thick, riddled in veins with prominent dome-like heads. I can't believe I'm reading this. Some bore the same coloration of their owners' varied hides, while others were bubblegum pink or deep red, flushed with the blood that engorged them. She wondered, watching as the technician moved her oiled hands in a continuous twist down the rigid shaft, if the men in the video had been specifically chosen as displays of the finest Minotaur meat available, and considered that reality might not match up with the glossy media, the same as it rarely did with human men. Okay, in this section here, I think we're moving forward in the flashback to where now she is slumped over her laptop and she's watched the video several times. I think this is where we were at the beginning when she was concerned about the neighbors seeing what she was watching. Now here's the beaming fox woman. Like I said, I would make her businesslike. This is a job and she derives no pleasure from it. It's a good contrast to what the main character Violet is going through. Now it says the woman performed the service on Minotaur after Minotaur. Why is there more than one? Why is she demonstrating it over and over again? I think one demonstration would be adequate. And also it gives Violet one Minotaur to focus on rather than a whole line of them. Now we've got a semicolon right here. Again, it's used improperly. It should be followed by a complete sentence. And further along this sentence, we have a typo. It looks like there's a missing space. Actually, this line right here should be combined with the previous sentence. So it would read, bullmen resting comfortably against their padded breeding stocks, comma, their thick members prominently displayed for the technician who stood a level below them. So these two sentences should be combined because this, without combining it to the previous sentence, is a fragment. Again, here is another space that's missing. And it also needs to be combined with the previous sentence. Otherwise, again, this is a fragment. We don't need she'd. I edited it out, but I tripped up on this several times when I was reading it. The had just drags the rhythm of the prose down tremendously. We're spending most of the opening chapter in a flashback. I think that's a mistake. I would take as she was pushed to stand beneath them until I would cut that completely. One, I'm not sure what that means, but two, you don't need it. Silhouettes of huge men, the shadows of their horns completely engulfing her. I like that sentence. I don't think it needs the rest of that. And then make this last bit a sentence of its own. She woke up gasping in a sweaty tangle, unsure of where she was or what she was contemplating. It's a really good way to end the paragraph. Now, going on to the next paragraph, there's small details that she might have overlooked. One, I'd get rid of might. That means she may have overlooked them, she may not have overlooked them. Be definitive. She overlooked them. Small details she overlooked, otherwise jumped out at her. The first small detail was the Minotaur's girthy member. I have a feeling that that's the first thing she looked at, that wasn't something that she just didn't notice the first 15 times she watched the video. Commiserate is used incorrectly. So this sentence here where she's looking at the Minotaur and wondering if this is a typical example, I would end the sentence here and then rewrite this to say maybe reality didn't match up with the glossy media. It rarely did with human men. So you could make two sentences out of this. One thing this author does is just keep sentences running on and on longer than they need to. Sometimes you need to stop, give the reader a chance to catch their breath, and then start with a new idea.
Anyway.
It's up to you to decide when the use of mechanical stimulation is necessary, the chipper woman had said seriously into the camera. The implication was clear. If the men were taking too long, apply the cylinders of the milking machine to speed things up. Despite the fact she knew exactly what was coming, Violet began to breathe hard when the technician released her hands, letting the oil bob as she took up one of the silver nozzles. The hum of the machine's air compressor was a steady white noise in the video, the mechanical arms within already pistoning, creating the rhythmic suction the Minotaur was about to experience. Sure enough, the big bull grunted and jerked as the cylinder was eased down on his straining, lowing deeply as the machine did its work. I like to continue providing manual stimulation at this point, the technician advised, and Violet whimpered, the same reaction she had each time she replayed this section numerous times the night before, when the woman on the video began to rub at the huge swollen pulling and squeezing as the Minotaur bucked against the table. Remember, the aim is a plentiful, speedy collection. Okay, I don't think I need to summarize what this section is about. Again, the chipper woman, I would not make the woman chipper, as I have explained before. Here's one thing, she says it seriously into the camera, but she's chipper. So generally, serious people aren't chipper. Now, it's this sentence here, the implication was clear if the men were taking too long to apply the machine. This is just a restatement of the previous sentence. So I would cut this entire line. It's not needed. Authors do not need to spoon feed their readers. Because when I'm reading, I take that as the author is saying that I am not intelligent enough to understand the ideas being expressed. Now, this line about the air compressor's steady noise and the mechanical arms inside of the air compressor pistoning is not easy to say. I don't think any of this is needed. This is from Violet's point of view, and she's watching this video. She's watched it multiple times. The hum of the air compressor is not what she's paying attention to. And if she's not paying attention to it, then there's no need to mention it. The pistons are inside the air compressor, and we can't even see those. So I wouldn't mention those either. So this sentence right here should end at the word advised, cut the word and start a new sentence. Now notice in this sentence we have the same reaction she had each time she had replayed this section. So you've basically got a repeat here. And if you have two pronouns that are the same, you can rewrite this sentence with only one of them. Violet whimpered, as she had with each replay. Now, since we have replayed, you don't have to put this section numerous times because this is indicated by the word replay. So you can cut this. Now, this next line, which should probably be a sentence by itself also, mentions the huge swollen pulling and squeezing. It's not the and I'm trying not to say that word more than I have to, but it's not the that are pulling and squeezing. And so on this last line, cut that M dash and put a comma there. I noticed that this author is inconsistent with her use of M dashes, colons, and semicolons. You don't have to necessarily follow the rules, but if you're going to break the rules, you want to be consistent about it and do it the same way each time. Readers pick up on this.
Anyway.
A green light flicked to life on the machine, indicating the collection had commenced as the Minotaur lowed again. His generous hips shaking the stocks above the chipper technician's head as he slammed against them. Violet's eyes didn't know where to dart on the screen, the rutting hips of the bull man, the cylinder sucking on the massive that jutted from the opening in the bench, or the twee old-fashioned milk bottle at the base of the collection unit that was steadily being filled with white. In the end, she dragged the video's progress indicator back repeatedly, a dozen or so times, giving each point of interest her absolute focus. The bottle was nearly full when the Minotaur finally sagged in satisfaction, completely spent, and Violet did the same at her desk chair. "This is insane," she told herself. "You can't do something like this. It's completely lewd and vulgar and inappropriate. Just get a job at the coffee place on the corner." "Is it, though?" A traitorous little voice piped up as she opened the small pantry cabinet, seeking something for breakfast. "It's a pharmaceutical company, a major multinational. It's not like you're working in some random guy's basement." She wasn't sure what she expected to find in the cupboard, knowing full well she hadn't gone shopping in over a week. "It's not like you'd have to do it forever," the voice continued as she walked up the sidewalk a short while later, heading to the discount grocery store several blocks away. "Just until you can get on your feet and pay down some bills. Until you can find something in your field that actually pays a living wage." She didn't know how long that would take, didn't know if there was ever be jobs in her field that paid more than a pittance. So basically this section right here, Violet has watched the video multiple times, and now she's debating whether she wants to take this job or not. And as she's mentally debating this question, she is looking for something to eat and then leaving the house and going to the grocery store. We're finally back in the present moment. I would cut the word "as" here and start a new sentence. "As" is one of those words like "that" and "with." You can't get rid of all of them, but when you see them in your writing, it's usually an indication that either a new sentence can be started or the sentence can be rewritten in a way that would delete that word. So I would cut "as" and start a new sentence here. I would quit calling the technician Chipper. There's only one technician, so we don't need a quantifier here to indicate which technician we're talking about. So cut Chipper. So here's a colon, and so we have a list. We have the rutting hips of the bull man, the cylinder sucking on the massive that jutted from the opening of the bench. We already know that. You can cut that. That way, the second item in the list structurally matches the first one. It reads better that way. Or the twee old-fashioned milk bottle at the base of the collection unit. You could cut "that was" steadily being filled. Also cut with white. I mean, ugh. Here it says "in the end." I don't know at the end of what when I read it. At the end of the video, at the end of the day, at the end of the 8 hours she had left to accept the job. You could probably cut that too. Now this is redundant. Repeatedly and a dozen or so times says the exact same thing. So this is an adverb, cut it. We've already pointed out multiple times that she's watched the video multiple times, so we don't have to state it multiple times. And here, where the bottle becomes full, cut and put a period here. Violet did the same at her desk chair. That's a short sentence, a great way to end the paragraph, and it needs to be set aside from what the Minotaur is experiencing. Now, so far in this chapter, she's used italics to indicate thought. That's typical in most writing. So here we have a tag indicating that it's a thought. That's not needed. And just a tweak on this last sentence, there's two sections here. She didn't know how long it would take, and she didn't know if there'd ever be jobs in her field. Now, since didn't know is here and here, we can remove the second one. She didn't know how long that would take, or if there would ever be a job in her field that paid more than a pittance.
Anyway.
The smell of the chain coffee shop on the corner caught her nose. Then, a waft of dark beans and sugary pastries, and Violet stopped in her tracks, heedless of the couple behind her, who were obliged to step into the street to move around her frozen form. "What the hell are you doing? You're almost 26 years old, and you can barely pay the rent. You're on your way to buy day-old bread and generic orange juice. Really, you're going to get a second job at this coffee shop? You'll need to, because at this rate, that's the only way you'll ever be able to afford to have anything there. This job could be a lifeline, remember? Stop being so stupid." She imagined the curl of the overpriced coffee leading her by the nose like an old-fashioned cartoon character as she crossed the street, pausing for only a moment before the shop's heavy doors. She was down to the last crumpled $20 bill at the bottom of her shoulder bag, and she actually did need to buy that no-brand orange juice. But she wanted breakfast, a proper breakfast. The coffee was burnt and bitter tasting, doctored with overly sweet syrups, and it and the honey-glazed challah braid had cost nearly half that crumpled 20. But it didn't matter, she thought, once she was back in her apartment and in front of her laptop once more. She paused, closing her eyes as she bit into the still-warm bread, honey sticky on her lips, before clicking on the link that would take her to the scheduled input screen. Okay, so in this section, she's debating some more, and she's supposed to go to the grocery store and buy groceries, but instead she went to a coffee shop and bought an overpriced coffee and an overpriced Danish. That coffee and Danish she could have purchased at the grocery store for about a third of the money. Maybe her financial difficulties are self-inflicted. Okay, in this first line, the word then is not needed. You can cut that. There's another and you can cut. Start a new sentence here. The smell of the coffee shop was attracting her, period. Violet stopped in her track. Now here, it's mentioned once again that she can't pay her rent. The author is battering the reader over the head with this fact, as if the readers have never had trouble paying their rent. Like this is a concept that the reader is having difficulty absorbing. So I would cut this. Also, in this sentence right here, the word there is not needed. I don't even know what they're talking about. To afford to have anything there. To have could be cut. The only way you'll ever be able to afford anything. Reads a lot better that way. Now, in this sentence right here, she's imagining the curl of the overpriced coffee leading her by the nose. Just cut this, she imagined. The curl of the overpriced nose... the curl of the overpriced coffee led her by the nose. So we don't need that she imagined it. It was actually doing it. This is a good visual. Taking like this is an old-fashioned cartoon and the odor of the coffee is forming an arm and it's grabbing her by the nose and pulling her into the coffee shop. That's happened to me before. Now it says pausing for only a moment before the shop's heavy doors. Now, before means in front of, but it also could mean before the shop's heavy doors did something, before they opened, before they closed. And so because it could go either way, the first time I read this sentence, I was expecting the doors to do something. So I would put, instead of before, I would put in front of, pausing for only a moment in front of the shop's heavy doors, and then the reader doesn't pause. I would start a new sentence here. Also, actually did need, just put needed. She needed to buy that no-brand orange juice, period. But she also wanted breakfast, a proper breakfast. The breakfast they serve in coffee shops is not a proper breakfast. Now, this sentence right here, it's fine up to this point, but then the next part is, and it and the honey glazed challah braid. This is kind of clunky sounding. So we want to make a comment about the coffee being bitter and overly sweet. And then here we want to make a comment about the challah braid, but get rid of it and. That's clunky sounding.
Anyway.
Welcome to Morning Glory Farm. It was going to be okay, she breathed. You'll be on the schedule next week, and pretty soon you can drink all the overpriced burnt coffee you want. She queued up the video one last time before bed that night, after she'd received the confirmation email welcoming her to the farm and outlining what she'd be doing the following week. Hands-on training will be provided. She was going to be good at this, Violet decided, dragging the cursor back to zoom in on the technician's hands, memorizing the way she gripped the slippery, the way her hands twisted. She always applied herself, given schoolwork and her part-time jobs her all. And this would be no exception. When the green light clicked on, she noted the way the Minotaur's hips bucked against the breeding bench, his movement matching the rhythmic spatters against the inside of the bottle. His deep bellow of pleasure seemed to rattle in her brain as she settled in her bed, wondering if they would all make the same sort of noises, if they'd all buck and thrust wildly when they as the Minotaurs in the video had. Hands-on training starting next week. You'll be finding out soon, she thought, ignoring the tingle between her thighs as she turned out the light. So this is the end of the chapter. This last section here that we read, Welcome to Morning Glory Farm. I believe this is the 4th or 5th time this statement has been said. I would say it once in the chapter. Maybe when she shows up to the interview, or maybe when she first turns on the video, but I wouldn't repeat it 4 or 5 times. This tag she breathed is not needed. We know because it's in italics that this is a thought. Now, it says she queued up the video one last time before bed, and then it says that night. Well, most people go to bed at night. Not everybody, but most. So that night is redundant. You don't need it. Cut it. And since this part is part of this sentence, you can get rid of she as well. After receiving the confirmation email welcoming her to the farm and outlining what she'd be doing the following week, you don't need that because she knows what she's going to be doing because she's watched the video 1,000 times. Hands-on training will be provided. Ha 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 ha, I get it. Hands-on. She was going to be good at this, Violet decided. Why not, instead of she, say I? I'm going to be good at this, Violet decided. Or just cut this completely and put this in italics. Now, on this part here, she's dragging the cursor back again and watching it. But previously it said that she's going to watch the video one last time. So it looks like she's watching the video 2 last times. This part right here could be cut. It's redundant. We know what she's doing with her hands. We know what she's gripping. We know the way her hands twist. This has already been described graphically. So cut this entire part. Now you need a hat here because she always applied herself is in the past. She's talking about what she had done in the past. Notice here. It's not given, it's giving. Giving schoolwork and her part-time jobs her all. So this is a misspelled word. It makes me wonder, did anyone edit this book? Here, cut this and start a new sentence. Right here, minor thing, but instead of in, I would put inside. His deep bellow of pleasure seemed to rattle inside her brain. You may even want to put this part at the beginning of the sentence. As she settled in her bed, his deep bellow of pleasure rattled inside her brain. Now we've got this comment, hands-on training again. I mean, we've already mentioned that like 2 paragraphs ago, so I would probably delete the mention of it on the previous paragraphs and then use it here. And that's the end of the chapter. I think that the chapter should begin with the interview. She walks into the room, she's the only human there, and she's nervous. She sits down and reflects on what brought her to this moment. Her inability to buy groceries, her inability to pay rent, the conversation she had with her mom, the noisy neighbors that are irritating her, all of the things that were in the flashback. Then you come forward to the present moment, and then she's given the demonstration. The chapter should end on the demonstration because that's the most impactful part of the opening chapter. So the ultimate question is, after reading this opening chapter, would you want to read the rest of the book? If so, I encourage you to do that. I'll leave a link to the book in the description below. If there's an opening chapter to a book that you would like for me to review, or if you're brave enough and you want me to review your opening chapter, just send me a message. I'm on X, Facebook, and YouTube. Until next time.